Let's start. So again, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. I'm Mike Starr, president of Lane Associates in the New York City area and chair of the MSCA Board of Managers. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's exciting program, Mindset and the Power of a Winning Spirit, both in business and in life, featuring the legendary Joe Montana. Joe will be chatting with us and answering your questions during today's event. And a special thanks to our program sponsor, BuildOps, who made this presentation possible. Just real quick before I introduce today's guest, a couple of housekeeping notes. If you do have a question for Joe, please type them in the chat box on your screen. We'll get to them as many questions as possible. Bear with us. And this program is also being recorded and will be available for viewing on the MCAA website within the next few days. So now today's guests. First, I'm not sure he needs an introduction, but Joe Montana is a widely considered the best NFL quarterback of all time. Joe personifies performance excellence and personal integrity both on and off the field. Yet the word most closely associated with him is not winner, it's leader. He led the 49ers to 4 Super Bowl wins with unflappable poise. Since his retirement in 1994, Joe has been active and successful in the venture capital world. He became an early investor in House Spirits, which recently sold off their aviation gin to Diageo. Later made famous by Ryan Reynolds. And in 2015, Joe turned his passion for investing into Liquid 2 Ventures and brought together the core partners that still remain today. Secondly, Alok Chanani, CEO and co-founder of BuildOps, is an entrepreneur who spent nearly a decade as the founder, CEO of USA Commercial, a real estate investment construction company that developed commercial real estate in major cities across the US. During the time, Alok realized how innovative technology could change the lives of specialty contractors he was working with and inspired him and his co-founder, Steve Chu, to launch an incredibly modern, robust software solution, which is what BuildOps is today. A former US Army captain, Alok served as platoon leader, combat engineer, and unit commander in Baghdad, spending a year commanding troops transporting large amounts of US currency around Iraq. Alok has a Bachelor of Science from Cornell University and an MBA in real estate from the Wharton School. So Alok, on behalf of MSCA and MCAA, I'd like to thank you once again for sponsoring today's program and for your sponsorship for the upcoming MSCA conference. So now I'll turn it over to Alok. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate it. And I'm super excited. I've been waiting for this day for a little while. Joe, you are a living legend. There's a lot of mechanical service contractors out in the audience today who are huge fans of your career. I'm going to dive in if that's good with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me.
All right. What's this? Oh, I think that was Tom Brady. He keeps blowing up my phone and we keep shutting him down. And I told him, Joe, that we only work with the best.
Well, I appreciate that.
Joe, a lot of people have heard about what happened with that final drive against the Bengals in Super Bowl 23. I'd love to hear firsthand about that John Candy story.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It really wasn't that I was trying to calm the guys down in the huddle, and I was pretty quiet in there to begin with, but I always tried to be myself, no matter what, you're winning, you're losing, and then, we're standing there. TV timeouts are a long time, and especially in the Super Bowl. So one of our players, Harris Barton, was a people person. And so during the week of the Super Bowl, obviously you have to stay in the Super Bowl city, and we were always free. We had practice and meetings, and then free for dinner, and then meetings again at night. And we were always free for dinner. And every time he would come back from dinner, he was like a little kid in a candy store who just saw some celebrity, and he just was keeping track of who all he saw, and just was so excited about it that I had met John Candy a number of years prior to that because he owned the Toronto Argonauts at one time. And he was trying to get, my contract was up in San Francisco, about to be up, and they were trying to get me to go to Canada. And so I met with him a few times. So I don't know, we were standing in the huddle, and just framed between two guys' shoulders was John Candy. And I didn't remember Harris saying that he had seen John Candy. So I just went over and just said, "Hey, H, hey man, there's John Candy." And Harris was standing there like perfectly stiff and straight. He never moves in the TV timeout. He's a little anal. But he looks over and then he starts mumbling a bunch of stuff about the Super Bowl. And when you're looking over at John Candy, what he was trying to win. And I just thought he would appreciate it then. But as you talk to him today, he appreciates it more today than he did back then at that point in time.
And Joe, how much time was left on the clock? And you were down by what, 6?
No, we were down by, I think we were down by 3, and there was a minute 52 or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it broke the tension.
Well, that wasn't exactly my intention, but it was just me being myself. And that's, like I said, I always tried to be, no matter what the situation was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to start off, a good kind of meaty topic is COVID. And we just talked about that a second ago. It's for like kind of coming out of it now, hopefully. A lot of folks in the audience today were impacted pretty significantly when life shut down. I think you said San Francisco just kind of opened back up. Most of the country's opening back up. LA certainly did. What advice from the comeback kid, would you give to our audience of fellow entrepreneurs and business owners? What advice maybe should they not pay attention to?
No, I just think you have to, everybody has their own opinions on it. And, you can obviously see what good the vaccines have done in the number of cases that we're seeing, and some of them, and the severity or the lack of severity of a lot of the cases due to that. And I just, don't be afraid to do that, and don't be afraid to go out there. Our whole family's vaccinated, and it just gives you a faster means to getting things back into, I believe anyway, to getting things back to really where it's normal. We, like you said, here in California, that everything's open again now.
Yeah.
I think there are only a few places where your masks are required, in like the hospitals or doctor's offices and places like that. But for most cases, the restaurants and shopping places are all open and do not require masks.
Right. So you grew up in Western Pennsylvania, blue collar coal mining town, famous for turning out great football players. Your dad never played football, but worked with you on your game. How did you develop that level of accuracy that you're famous for?
I think one of the things that my dad tried to do, he didn't play sports, but he felt that at an early age, if he read, enough books and about just the fundamentals of whether it was baseball, basketball, football, or the 3 sports that I played year round, that he could teach me the fundamental part of it. And he eventually found, for football, my neighbor, our yard wasn't big enough to do a lot of the things like running routes, and he would run routes for me and things, but he found this tire swing that they had put up one day and decided that 2 things could happen. He could quit running around, and he could make me throw the ball through this tire and work on learning how to throw the ball accurately. And then he started swinging the tire, and so you had to hit it while it was moving. And so he was good that way. But I think that's probably the biggest part that he taught me, were the fundamentals of the game, and then relied on the coaches after that.
Right.
Then you find out, all the way through the 49ers and the Chiefs, you still, every day you worked on your fundamentals. So it was a big part of my learning process, and little did I know that I would use it all the way through, and even in business today.
Right. So speaking of other sports that are not football, you mentioned basketball, you just mentioned baseball. You you didn't just kind of casually play these sports. You won a state championship in basketball. You got a two-sport scholarship by NC State. You eventually chose a football scholarship at Notre Dame. And in the 70s, Notre Dame was probably the most prestigious program out there, maybe a little different than it is today. Just because it was the most prestigious program, most people would say that's kind of the obvious choice. But the most prestigious doesn't mean the easiest path to success. You might have had more playing time at another school. Maybe another school might have better academic offerings. You chose kind of the harder path with tougher competition. What was your sort of decision making process when you made that pretty pivotal decision that impacted the rest of your life?
Yeah, Notre Dame was one of those places I had a dream of going. I don't know, maybe if I'd been recruited to any of the schools out on the West Coast that were near the ocean, I had a different feeling. But I wasn't recruited, by any of those schools. So in the interim, though, Notre Dame was always on TV back then. Every Saturday, they had this replay program that they played every Sunday. And so you just felt like you saw them all the time. And there were a lot of people around my area that were actually going to Notre Dame at the same time,
Yeah.
or headed there, or friends that I knew that were going there. And I had the worst visit ever of any of the schools. So when I got there, I think it poured down rain the whole time I was there. And I was staying at this little hotel that's on campus. And there was something going on the far end of campus that in this building for a charity. And it was a casino night. And so the guy taking me around took me over there and then left me to find my way back to where this little hotel was. And I was like, oh man. Well, finally, a student helped me get back there, but because I had no clue where it was. But I don't know. There was just a feeling about Notre Dame that I had. And as soon as they made an offer to me for a scholarship, I quit visiting all the other schools and accepted.
All right. So it's let's say 1974, and you end up at Notre Dame. Coach Ara, kind of sits you as a freshman because they have a ton of talent, and it's a tradition that freshmen can't play. At the end of the season, he retires, and then all of a sudden you've got Dan Devine. You weren't one of Dan's recruits, so how did you sort of reposition yourself or think about this new system?
The system was actually a little bit better for a quarterback than what Era was running. Era was more of a rollout type offense. This was more of a straight drop back. So it became fun, but it wasn't as easy. I always joke, it's like when I got to Notre Dame, excuse me. When I got to Notre Dame, I figured there'd be another freshman or quarterback or two, but there were 7 freshman quarterbacks that were brought in that year. And I always laugh with the boys and I would tell them that, I was so good my freshman year, I worked my way all the way to number 7 on the freshman list. So I couldn't get any lower. But it just took time. I would really, honestly, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Academically, the school that I went to didn't prepare me as well as necessary. So I ended up spending a lot more time, studying and doing things while other people were out and running, having fun. And athletically too, I got there, and it might have been excuse me, one of the largest football teams I've ever seen. Especially on the defensive side, we had on the front 4 there were 3 first-round picks. In the linebacking crew there was another first-round pick and 2 first-round picks out of the secondary.
Yeah.
So it was a crazy. But the one guy was 6'8", and he ended up going to the Rams. The other guy, Steve Niehaus, was the first pick ever of Seattle. The other defensive end was a guy named Willie Fry, who was probably 6'6", and he was the first pick of the Steelers. And then you go back, and on the other tackle, he ended up being drafted, I think, in the second round. But these guys were all 6'6", 6'5", 230, 240. In the middle two guys were easily 260, 270, which was big for what we were seeing. The linebackers were, our linebacking crew was, I think the smallest guy was 6'2", and our secondary was huge.
Yeah.
And same thing, I think the smallest guy there was 6'2" or 3".
Yeah.
And so it was kind of overwhelming when I got there, to say the least.
Yeah. So let's fast forward past freshman year. I guess you have a little time to acclimate, and you've got these really large guys, 6'6", 250. You're a sophomore. You're not playing in the first 4 games of the season. Week 4, I think you see your first action against North Carolina. 5 minutes left, down 2 scores. You throw 2 bombs and complete a 2-point conversion. And as a sign of thanks, perhaps, you get to start the next game. And Joe, I think I was in the Army, so I like to call them the chair force. The head coach, Devine, turns to you in the 4th quarter, down 20 points. Again, you lead the team to a 31-30 comeback. And the thing that everybody still talks about and remembers about that season is Daniel Rudiger got carried off the field in the last game of that season. So you were at the game and you were on the team. We know we're in LA. We know about Hollywood. And we know Hollywood takes liberties. What's fact and what's fiction?
Well, he got in the game because it was the last game of the season. And what Notre Dame traditionally would do was dress all the seniors, even though they typically wouldn't. And usually they tried to schedule someone that they can handle fairly well, and so that they could get the seniors in the game. And that was the biggest thing. And so Oregon wasn't what Oregon is around today, or has been. And we were ahead, and they start putting the seniors in, and he did get a sack.
Yeah.
He did get carried off the field as a joke by two or three of the 2 biggest pranksters on the team, or jokesters, I should say. And but it makes for a good story. It makes for a good story. There's a lot of things that, like, I didn't throw my jersey in. I don't think anybody did, but it may. It's Hollywood, like you said.
Yeah. So you would not have given up your jersey for Rudy?
Oh no, he knows that.
I just looked him up the other day. I think he's 5'6", 165.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And
Tasmanian devil.
Right? Like.
Yeah, no, he had a big heart. I mean, the guy never quit. No, I mean, he was on the prep squad, so he was always going against our first team offense, and he was just getting trashed every day.
Yeah.
But he never quit, and he never gave up, and trying to get a chance to get on the field, and finally got one and took advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah. So before I got in the Rudy stuff, I mentioned your first couple games, you come in down by a lot and you bring the team back. And people started calling you Joe Cool for your ability to stay calm under pressure and just kind of make jokes and just be level-headed. Do you have any tips for us as, we can stay calm? And you mentioned the transition at the beginning of this conversation from football to business, but how do we stay calm and focused on our own goal lines?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I learned actually even later in my career, when I ended up in San Francisco with Bill Walsh, was the preparation really allows you to be a lot more relaxed, and you're ready for you're coming to work. And it wasn't coming to work on Sunday, it was coming to work every day. And he wanted you to be perfect every day. There wasn't just go out there and go through the motions. And we never had timed practices, so we're not going to be here for 2.5 hours. We're going to be out here, we're running 100 plays, and they're all going to be perfect, and then we'll get off the field. So we can do that in 2 hours. We can do it in 3 hours. It's up to you guys. And so the preparation was a big part of it. And I think if you think about even back when you were a kid and you were in class and you were studying, right, or you're getting ready to take a test, when you were prepared for that test, when you walked in the room, you were a lot different than when you hadn't prepared. There was anxiety inside of everyone, knowing that you weren't really ready. And it's the same in business. When you come to work every day, there's pretty much an agenda of things you want to do and want to accomplish, and being ready for those every day, and not just the big sales day. Coming to work with the same excitement, and that's what Bill tried to build when he was putting together the team, was looking for people who had like goals, like ambitions, personalities, all kind of them, as long as they weren't disruptive to the culture he was trying to put together. And you were allowed to be you were obviously allowed to have some of individualness, which I think we all should be able to do, as long as it didn't interrupt. And when it did interrupt, he didn't care if you were a starter or not. You found yourself on another team pretty quick if it didn't change. And a perfect example, we had a defensive back. He was a starter, and he called himself the blanket because he said he could cover you like a blanket, right? And, we laughed, and all he wanted was Jerry Rice to say, when the press asks you who's the best defensive back you played against, you tell him me every day in practice.
Nice.
And it got to be so consuming that he wouldn't let it go.
Yeah.
And then one game he got beat for 3 touchdowns. So because he called himself the blanket, when he came in the next morning, there was a baby blue blanket hanging in his locker with 3 holes burnt in it. And the worst thing you can do in there is get upset, right? Because now he's mad, and the next day he comes in, now there are 3 pieces of burnt toast on the top of his locker. And he just went off the deep end. And we went to Atlanta to play the Falcons, and he wouldn't come out of his room to go to the game. And then Tuesday, our day off, he was on another team.
Wow.
And didn't matter if he was a starter or not. It just became so disruptive to everybody that Bill decided that he needed to make a move. And but I mean, it's the same thing. It's how you come to practice every day, how you come to work every day, how you prepare. Not, like I said, not just for that big meeting day. It's every day.
Right. So 76, you separate your shoulder, you get redshirted. That was kind of a rough patch, I imagine. Misses about a season and a half, and then you come out swinging, and you just talked a lot about prep and how, when prep meets opportunity, it kind of yields success. Is that what you did when you were kind of redshirted in 76 and 77 to kind of prepare you for what happened after? I mean, you won almost every game, including the national title in 78.
Yeah, I think the injury actually helped me focus a little bit more. There was another quarterback an older guy than me. I think he was 2 years older, and he ended up separating his shoulder. And when he came back, his throwing shoulder, what they did for his rehab, somehow, some way, he couldn't throw like he could before. And so I was so nervous. I didn't want that to happen to me. So I spent a lot of time on that rehab. And in the meantime, I had a lot of time to, spend time in my playbook more, without the pressure of having to go out and practice every day and not be ready. So it gave me a little bit more time to prepare and really understand what it took to play at that level.
So I think I just talked about 78. I mean, obviously you kind of came out swinging after being injured and spending that time in that playbook. You lost only 1 game to your rival SC, You returned to the Cotton Bowl for the chicken soup game where it's freezing. Halftime, you had to stay in the locker room, extra time to warm up. And
Wesley cheated that day. That's where the tuck rule came in. I still have this conversation with my old quarterback coach, Paul Hackett, who coached me through the '84 Super Bowl in a couple of years, and then again in Kansas City, because he was the quarterback coach at USC when we came back to go ahead and win, and the quarterback was getting ready. They were coming back. They needed to score, and they needed a field goal, and he ducks down and he drops the ball.
Mm.
And we recover the fumble, and they call it an incomplete pass.
Yeah.
The next play, he throws a long pass down the middle, and then they kick a field goal and we lose. So I gave him a hard time. So that was back before the tuck rule came into effect.
Do you remember the bowl of chicken soup?
Yeah, it was probably the coldest game I ever played in. I mean, the night before the game, they had a huge ice storm. And the wind chill was like -9, but it was a wet -9. And they were actually, before the game, during the game, there were more people outside the stadium in their vehicles listening to the game or watching on a TV somewhere, but the stadium was not anywhere near close to even half full. And we got to the stadium before the game, and I never seen anything like this before, but they had chipped the ice off the AstroTurf, and I saw this golf cart going back and forth, and I couldn't figure out what it was doing. Well, there were some pieces of ice they couldn't chip, so they were throwing rock salt.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can imagine with all the scrapes and cuts and everybody falling on that stuff, what it looked like after the game. But yeah, the wind was blowing so hard in one direction. I mean, 69 points scored in the game.
Yeah.
And only 2 touchdowns were scored against the wind. And one of them was a punt that was blocked and returned. So if you didn't have the wind, you had no chance of scoring.
Yeah. Wow. So you kind of wrap up, and I guess you get past that kind of super cold, freezing Cotton Bowl game. Now you're with the 49ers. 79, you start your rookie year, the same year Bill Walsh takes over. Previous year, 49ers are 2-14. Walsh comes in, DeBerg's running the offense. Although they're 2-14, it seems like the football was a little more competitive. This is, as far as I can recollect, at least, the first time you're on a really losing team. What were you able to take out of that experience of losing that kind of helped you and the team develop a winning culture over time?
Well, I think it made you realize how much you really hate to lose, and I think the fear of losing is worse than the joy of winning. When you ask a lot of athletes that have made it to that level, they'll tell you that pretty much the same thing. You're expected to win, and so when you win a game, it's like, okay, on the next week. But if you lose, it's tenfold on the feeling and that. And so being 2-14, I mean, I look back on the team that was put together there, and there was a couple players, but for the majority, you knew it was almost like the Keystone Cops there for a while. It was every Saturday after we would leave practice, they'd hold a huge tryout. There'd be like 50, 60 guys come in and try out. He was trying anything he could do to find someone that might fit into the team. But you could see his disappointment in it, in the success that he had went where he had been. And then, coming to that team, he knew there was a lot of things that needed to be changed. The front office, he redid that whole thing. He started redoing the team. He left a couple of veterans in there, but for the most part, the next year, a lot of those guys were gone, and the team was almost completely different.
Got it. What I kind of understand, he's selecting people to build a culture almost from scratch, from the front office all the way to the guys in the field. But what was it that he did with like that helped bring out the best in you? Was there something that he did that was different? Or what extracted the most value from his players out in the field? And was there something that clicked, or was it just like a million different things that he did kind of right?
Yeah, there were a lot of things, but I still, his stride, his ability to teach the position and understand the offense, but more so we worked the fundamental part of everything every day, and to make sure that those things stayed the same. And but his really drive for perfection was probably the most, and the one he put that on the most was the quarterback position. You didn't get a lot of game balls because you felt you get enough accolades from outside that you don't need to get it also from in there. And he expected that of you. That was what it was. It was when you come to practice, we talked about this once with him, and he goes, I want you to try to complete 100, all your passes, 100%. Did it happen? I can't remember a practice where that had happened. But it made you think about, what's the most important part of what I was doing, and that became the accuracy part of it. And because you look at in high school, got guys are wide open. In college, guys are open by 3 feet. In the NFL, you got a guy right on a guy's back, and now he's open. It's just you got to get him the ball and figure out how to get him the ball so that the defender can't get a hand on it. And those are the things we worked at a lot in practice. And I mean, he would say things like, when a guy goes down and runs a hook, he's facing you. You can see him, and you can see the defender. He can't see the defender anymore.
Right.
So if the defender's coming from his right side, I want you to throw the ball to the left number, to tell him to turn that way. And guys running across the field, I want the ball 12 inches in front of the numbers, not 24. And so he has to reach and think about a guy trying to take his head off, and not 8 inches behind him where he has to stop his momentum. So he kind of made you deliver the ball. And the only way to do that was to work on it in practice every day. And whether it was against a defender or whether you're just running routes, he wanted you to throw the ball to certain spots. And when those fundamentals became as important as anything. And we had a really, I think one of the things when you look at, when you talk about the fundamentals, is when a business starts to go, you're having success, and then all of a sudden things change, and now all of a sudden you're looking at numbers that are declining. A lot of us want to go out and try to grab for the new thing, for the great, what can we do to fix this up here? And when realistically, what he would always do was look backwards at what was taking place. How do we get here? Usually it's a lack of, you lost sight of the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And so we're playing the Saints one time at home, and the field was a mess. It had rained for a few days, and the score was we were losing 35-13 in the end of the third quarter, and he called everybody up and said, "Look, guys, here's what I want to do." 35-3, I'm sorry. And he said, I want to go back to our fundamental offense and our fundamental defense. And all I want to do when this game ends is I want to come out of here going this direction up. And today's not our day, I get it, but let's try to make something out of it still. Well, we came back and won the game 38-35 by not trying new things, but by going backwards, running the simple things that we all, took for granted for a while, and then started to see that, hey, these things are pretty good. We need to pay more attention to them.
Yeah, that's amazing. What The kind of partnership with you, Jerry Rice, and Bill Walsh, I would make the argument. Some people would make the argument it was the greatest kind of partnership of all time. Earlier this week, internally, we were talking about the partnership between Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, and how that was kind of a special partnership. I think a lot of people make the argument that the three of you were the best ever at your job. Maybe none as great without the others. What was it between the three of you? So it's now, now you've got Rice in the mix, yourself. And what was it that was so special that brought out the three of you?
I think the one thing about Jerry was, you didn't really realize until you saw it in action was his work ethic. Now, when he got there, we'd already won 2 Super Bowls. So, we felt pretty good about what our work ethic was and where we were headed. And then he came in. It was a first-round pick. And I'll be honest with you, the first day or two just wasn't really his day. I mean, balls were hitting him in the face and bouncing off the shoulder pads. But the thing that he did was every time he caught a pass, he would run and score a touchdown. And, like I said, our practices weren't timed. So by the time we had to wait for him to come back, every time he did this. And we're all going, oh, come on, rookie. You don't have to do this.
Yeah.
But 2 things happened from it.
And 2 Super Bowls already.
That work ethic. What's that?
And you had won 2 Super Bowls already at that point.
Yeah. And so the one thing that they got from it was that, here's Jerry Rice that you look back and you go, is it a coincidence that he's the NFL's all-time touchdown reception leader by a large margin? You go, no, that's what he did every day in practice.
Yeah.
Every day he scored a touchdown every time he touched the ball. And the thing about the work ethic is that it becomes contagious to the guys around you. So the receiver on the other side was a guy named John Taylor. Now, you would throw the ball to John Taylor. Now, John Taylor would run, and he would score a touchdown in practice. And then you throw the ball to Roger Craig, the running back, and he would do the same thing. And then you throw the ball to one of those 3, and they basically were racing down. They'd all race to the end zone and then come back. Number one, they're staying in shape, obviously. But the other thing that happens is you never know when the little things that you do, and you sometimes don't want to pay attention to, but it's those little things that make a difference. And while they were doing that, we go down to play the Rams in LA, and we usually play pretty well down there against them. But this day we weren't playing well, and we were behind, and we were getting terrible field position. We got the ball one time on the 6. Now, I take 3 steps back and I throw a slant to John Taylor of 10 yards. He goes 94 yards for a touchdown, but it's not so much that he scored the touchdown. It's Jerry Rice who was running down the field, they threw blocks inside the 20 to make sure he got in the end zone. And if that one's not good enough, we get the ball on the 4. I take those same 3 steps. I throw that same 10-yard pass.
Yeah.
He goes 96 yards for a touchdown. Again, with Jerry Rice way down the field, throwing blocks to get him into the end zone. And, you take for granted, like I said, that those things that all of a sudden pop up, the little things that those guys were doing that all of a sudden made you realize that, wow, and we went on to win the game. But those are the things that, sometimes we forget about and paying attention to that little thing. And for a quarterback, now I'm happy as all heck, right? I've thrown 2 10-yard passes, but in the books, I got 198 yards of passing and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So they can do that all they want, practice, I don't care.
Yeah. So Joe, you the NFL MVP in '89. You won the Super Bowl again. This is your 4th, and I can't think of. I think maybe Terry Bradshaw, but 4 trips to the Super Bowl, coming back home with 4 trophies. You're probably thinking about your childhood heroes, maybe the Steelers a little bit, and potentially your legacy. And then right after you end up getting traded to Kansas City. Incredible fan base, but different, everything's different. how did you adjust to that? How did you think about that? And what was the biggest factor that kind of ultimately led to your retirement?
Um, I looked at Kansas City as a challenge because the 49ers wouldn't let me compete for the job after I hurt my elbow. And, you know, when I left, I actually hurt my hand, which in turn ended up going to my elbow, but in the championship game. And, you know, normally when we just won 2 Super Bowls in a row. When I left the game, we were still winning.
Yeah.
And I told George Seifert, I don't know what you did or what he did, but it wasn't enough to keep winning the game. And I just had the best season of my career, statistically of my career, and I can't even compete. I typically should get my job back, but I don't want it back. I want to make sure everybody knows that it's mine, and I want to win it back. And he said, no, we're not going to let you compete. And so I said, okay, I know I can still play. And I started looking for teams, and it was between Arizona and the Chiefs. I tried to get to Pittsburgh, but they weren't looking for a quarterback at the time. And so I ended up in Kansas City because one of the main reasons, a couple main reasons, I should say, they had a great organization. They had a great defense, and they had a solid offensive line. You know, we ended up bringing Marcus Allen back into Kansas City with me. And we had a really good team and should have won a Super Bowl there. But the other part of it was Paul Hackett, who coached me, as we talked about earlier, through the '84 Super Bowl, and he was at USC that we played against, and he was now the offensive coordinator there. So he was running a combination of the old offense that I knew and part of Marty Schottenheimer's offense, who was now the head coach there. So that transition was a little bit easier to understand and get. And the ultimate decision to retire really was physical part of it. You know, I got a concussion, and I don't know what number it was during one of the games, and most of them you don't remember, and they're not painful that you can remember. This one was like a lightning bolt that went from one side of my head to the other.
Yeah.
And I looked at the kid, we had 4 kids, and started looking at my health and thinking that, maybe I should just get out of this game before I get physically unable to be able to run around and do things with the kids. And and I decided I could have played a couple more years for sure, especially with that team. But the physical part just took its toll. I mean, and it's still doing it today. I mean, I've had 27 surgeries to date.
Wow.
So, yeah,
That's a lot.
it hasn't been much fun.
Well, speaking of your health, Nate, precursor, Nate mentioned to me that you were trying to dial down some of the road rage, and probably helpful given some of your past issues with heart disease. And we know that you recommitted to getting your health back on track. A lot of people would have probably taken it as a setback, but you took it as a challenge.
Yeah.
How do you think about challenges later on in life, like today, versus back on the football field? Is that, and that's kind of the theme of today, kind of just that winning mindset. How do you approach these kind of challenges?
Well, I think the hardest part is getting started in them, right? Because you have to make a lot of changes. And then once you put your mind to it, it's almost the same, right? You work out every day, or if I miss a day, you feel guilty about it, but there's always something that I try to do every day. Is to have a routine every day, every kind of a 3-day routine I'm going through right now that alternates, and that involves some light lifting and some cardio in one manner or another. And it's got slowed down a little bit because I just had my knee replaced 3 months ago. So starting to get some of that back at this point in time. But yeah, those are the things that scare you. And the nice part is the thing that they noticed 25 years ago now or so, maybe more, is it's never changed. So whatever I've been doing so far, I've been fortunate to try to keep it from getting worse. And, you know, it's a battle every day, but I think the things that really makes the change easier, especially when you're looking at your health, is doing things in moderation, especially eat food is the toughest one because I like to eat. So, I mean, I went from 195 to 217 pounds after I retired. So, and now I'm back, just dipped under 200 for the first time since then. And so I've been working on it slowly, but I think the thing is, you know, you still want to enjoy stuff and life, but if you can learn how to portion control, I think it's the biggest help getting started. And then once you get into it, then you feel guilty when you do things. Or like I used to be able to eat a huge steak. Now I take like 2-3 bites and I start thinking, and I've had enough of it. But
Yeah.
my wife would always want to share. Let's share something. I don't want to share anything. And now we share all the time, and you know, it's a contributing factor to help with my health.
So Joe, obviously everybody, you know, when you say Joe Montana, people think greatest football, you know, greatest quarterback of all time. Thing I think that kind of surprises even today when I was talking to a few people about this webinar, that surprises them is your success as an investor off the field. You got into a few good stocks early on, Dropbox, Pinterest. You've even kind of been on some lists of celebrity investors. Obviously, you're a 3-time investor in BuildOps, something that we're very honored and kind of proud that you're willing to kind of invest in us. What similarities do you see between investing and football? How do you kind of keep that Joe Cool mentality? Is it similar in terms of pressure and adrenaline? You know, I understand that Ron Conway was kind of influential in kind of getting you involved into investing. How do you think about your investing framework? Any kind of lessons learned from Ron, or just investing in general that shapes how you invest?
Well, I think the first thing that happened was when I first retired, I got 2 of the guys I played with got involved in fund of funds and the venture side. And from living and playing here in the Valley, you know, we got a lot of the guys who ran the top tier funds were our friends or our neighbors, and and coached our kids in sports or whatever might be. And we just leveraged those into a fund of funds. And so we got into the top tier funds, Sequoia, Excel, Kleiner, Benchmark, Greylock, and we eventually grew that into larger allocations and then into leveraged buyout funds, hedge funds, and top tier real estates. And I stepped away when during the bubble, somebody made a crazy offer on our house, and we ended up moving up to the wine country. And I started driving back and forth from the wine country to Woodside Road, where our office was. And, you know, that was a minimum 2-hour drive, usually more like 3 to 4. And so kids were playing sports and I was leaving early from the office, decided I was going to step back away from it. So I stepped away from that. Fund of funds was not always fun. It was fundraising constantly. And so I was happy to get away from it, but also it reconnected especially as Nathaniel had come out of college, and Ron Conway had reconnected with Ron, and he started taking Nathaniel and I to Y Combinator classes. And actually, he was the first one to speak to every class for a while. And so we'd get to see the class earlier than anybody else. And so we started doing a couple little things here and there. And eventually Nathaniel caught on to a startup, and you know, Nathaniel always, first thing he said was, "Oh, just my luck," or, you know, why now? Because Ron, as soon as he caught on to the startup, Ron just came out and said, "Why don't you start a fund?"
Yeah.
I'll help you. But in the meantime, you know, what we had learned through Ron, we were followed him and his SV Angel guys around, just kind of seeing what they're looking for, kind of, you know, what are you looking for in the founder? What are you looking for in the company? Trying to find out a little bit of their old secret sauce. And then you find out as I got started and I think the real key to that investment part is having a team. Even though it was just Nathaniel and I, we still were a team at what we were doing. And putting together a team, I wanted it to be diverse so that we could invest across sectors. And so I was introduced through Nathaniel and I had invested in a company called URX alongside First Round Capital. And they had asked what we were up to. And I said, well, starting a fund. And he said, well, you should meet this guy, Michael Ma, and who had started a company called TalkBin in the mobile feedback space, ended up selling it to Google, and Yale undergrad, Harvard MBA guy. And so we met with him, and then he agreed to come on board, or at least to try. So what we did eventually was to put the team together before and start doing stuff prior to the formation of the fund, to be sure that we worked well together. And then I was introduced at another one of those Ron Conway events to Mike Miller, one of our other partners who lives in Seattle. He is our resident deep tech guy, a PhD in applied particle physics out of Yale, MIT fellow. I always joke with him, telling him his kink is that he had a Michigan State undergrad. So it became Nathaniel and I and those two guys now. And the key to investing it's the same as everywhere, right? You have to put together a good team, and we get good feedback from everybody. We could get good deal flow, and especially those three guys, Nate, Mike and Michael, you know, all went through startups, so had exits. Nathaniel's company ended up getting purchased by Twitter, and he spent a year and a half or maybe a little more than that at Twitter before he came back to the fund. And so their ability to help young companies, especially early, before the big guys come down and, you know, gobble everything else up and kind of push you out of the way, I think really has helped our deal flow. You know, it takes the four of us to get it done.
Yeah. I can say Michael Ma, you know, texting back at 12:03 a.m. probably helps with the deal flow too.
Well, I don't think he sleeps. We're not sure if we haven't seen him sleep yet, but yeah, I don't think his phone or his computer is ever off. So.
Joe, I have a final closeout question for you, and that is about service. You know, I'm ex-military. A number of the folks in the audience have served as well. You've left an indelible mark through service on and off the field. You obviously continue to make an impact through the companies and the ideas that you're investing in now. The folks watching today, they know a thing or two about service because they literally run service companies, hence the Mechanical Service Contracting Association of America. What is your what is your overarching philosophy towards service and leaving a lasting impact?
I don't care what industry you're in, there's some form of service, right? Doesn't matter. You're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis. And I think the biggest thing the service where you were, obviously a lot different than what else we're talking about. And, you know, I'm so appreciative, as my family and everyone else in this country is, of what our military service people have done, you know, to keep us safe in these crazy times. And, you know, can't thank you guys enough by any stretch of the mean. And I don't even want to try to compare what what the service that we do or we support and the charities that we support comes anywhere near what you have done and or anyone like you has done. And so I want to say thank you right up front for that. But it's about people as always, right? It's a people game no matter what you do. It's very rare. Is there maybe tennis because you got yourself, no, but you got a coach, you got someone working you out. I mean, you still have people around you. So it's one of those things that you have to learn, understand people, and you have to deal with people, and you have to treat people right. And until we get that correct in our society, we'll always have a struggle somewhere. And at some point in time, everyone's going to realize that, you know, just treat people like you want to be treated. And we wouldn't have all these issues that we see running around today or happening today.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I think we ran a little over on time, so we appreciate you sticking with us.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's a huge, huge honor just to kind of, you know, have the opportunity to speak with you on the behalf of the MSCA, the Mechanical Service Contracting Association of America, on behalf of BuildOps, you know, our company here. It's just been a real honor and a pleasure to kind of hear about your life and your legacy, and we appreciate you. And I see Nate is on here as well, just spending time with us and sharing more about your life. So thank you, Joe.
Great, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me again.
Hello.
Yes. Hey,
Hello. Thank you to you and BuildOps for making today's program a reality. It's such a pleasure to have Joe with us and to answer the questions, to inspire all of us to be the best leaders that we can be. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you again. Thanks for having me.